Welcome again to Global Health Talks. This is Mike Lesner, and once again, I am here with such an interesting medical doctor, and far beyond. The arc of this doctor's career shows no signs of letting up. If I'm not mistaken, he just graduated medical school in 2011, and already I'll take you through some of the things he's already achieved, and there's going to be no holding him back. And in addition to all these talents, you can see the guitar on his wall. So he's not only scientifically brained, he's creatively brained, and he knows chord patterns. My guest today is my friend, Dr. Juan Espinoza, MD. A little bit about Juan's background: undergraduate at a school I'm very familiar with, Washington University in St. Louis. This propelled him to Keck School of Medicine at USC, and ultimately to his residency at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, one of the premier nationally ranked children's hospitals for acute care for children. But what we want to talk to Juan today about is something that I know he has a passion for, and we do as well, because our mission here on Global Health Talks is to talk about innovations and technologies and implementations that are applicable worldwide to create health equity, so that the people in the wealthiest environments and the people in the poorest and more depraved environments can share with best medicine. So, Juan, welcome to the show. I think a good place to start would be for you to tell us what CTIP is. I mean, we know the words Consortium for Technology and Innovation in Pediatrics, but most of the people watching the show today are lay people, and we really need to get a lay definition, like a teachable moment from Dr. Espinoza, as to what exactly that means, and then we'll move into why is it important and necessary.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for the kind intro, Mike. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about it. So I am the principal investigator and director of the West Coast Consortium for Technology in innovation in pediatrics. And we are an FDA-funded pediatric device consortium. So the Pediatric Device Consortium program, or the PDC, was first created by the FDA through in 2007 and funded in 2009. There have been now 4 cycles of this program. And the goal of the program is to identify institutions and organizations who have excellence in pediatrics and in medical device innovation, and empower them through funding to identify early stage pediatric medical device innovators and support them with guidance, with advice, with networking, with relationship building, and with funding in order to actually get them from concept to commercialization. Commercialization being the ultimate goal, because at that stage is when patients actually get to benefit from these devices. Now, why did the FDA create this program back in the 2000s? That's because medical devices are a huge unmet need in pediatrics. When we think about innovation in healthcare, and we think about technology and science and research, you can broadly think about it as innovations in drugs and biologics, so new medications, new treatments, innovations in procedures and approaches, so new surgical techniques or new treatment approaches. And finally, we think about devices, and devices are the things that we use to diagnose diseases, but also things that we use to treat diseases. Devices are, from a regulatory standpoint, very different from drugs. They are also reimbursed very differently. And so there is this unique set of pressures on pediatric medical devices where you're talking about a relatively small population, right? Overall, there are fewer children that are sick that require complex medical devices. You are talking about a smaller market, even so there are fewer patients and they are just reimbursed worse. So we don't pay for pediatric healthcare the way that we pay for adult healthcare. And once you've sort of taken those financial pressures, and on top of that, you add the regulatory complexity and some of the scientific complexity of trying to design things for very small bodies or things that have to grow over time. And in addition, some ethical or research questions, right? Are some things even appropriate to do in research on very young children? Once you compound all of those things together, what you get is the ecosystem that we have now, where there are very, very, very few incentives for anyone to develop pediatric medical devices. And so that's how we arrived at the situation where there just isn't funding and there isn't interest from the private sector to develop it. I think there are innovators, there are researchers, there are companies who would like to pursue these. There are patients who clearly need them. And the FDA certainly wants to encourage people to develop these devices. But the reality is that with all of those pressures, it's been really, really hard. And so over the last 20 years or so, there's been a concerted effort to create a number of legislative, regulatory, and financial incentives to drive the creation of new medical devices. And the PDC program fits within that overall landscape of attempts to try to drive more innovation in pediatric medical devices.
So before, if I'm understanding correctly, Juan, and thank you for articulating that so well, before we can jump the hurdle to attack health inequities with technology and data, we have to jump the financial hurdle, given the inequities and given the fact that pediatric innovation by its very nature is forced to lag behind innovation in general. Would that be a correct statement?
Yeah, I think that would be fair to say. I think there's two versions of the forcing. One is we have to innovate because no one else is innovating for us. When I say us, I mean the pediatric field. And then the second consideration is that because there are none of the usual carrots and sticks that we use to encourage innovation in healthcare, whether it's reimbursement or payment, they're just very weak in pediatrics because of the sort of financial pressures and the market pressures in there. So yeah, it's we're in many ways, I often talk about children sort of being one of the largest underserved groups in the United States. We don't usually think of age groups as being underserved groups, but it truly is the case in pediatrics. We just don't invest in pediatric care the way that we do in adults, and medical devices being sort of the hardest, smallest part of all pediatric care suffers significantly from that.
Which is why there's a very special need for advocacy like the kind you give. Little children have great difficulty speaking up and asking, what's going on? Why am I waiting around? What is this? I think it's very interesting. What type of support do you give to these groups through your accelerator and through your academic partners? How do you put this all together to achieve the goal?
Yeah, so it's so the way that CTIP helps the companies in our portfolio sort of breaks down into 4 big categories. So the first category is through grants. So we provide grants directly to these early stage startups to advance their devices. So that's direct financial support to these early stage companies.
Now let me interrupt you there. What is the criteria for a grant?
Yeah, so the criteria for any company to receive any kind of support from CTIP is that they must be a medical device as defined by the FDA. They must have a specific pediatric application, and they must be based in the United States. These are federal funds, and so they're meant to go to companies that are here based in the United States. Those are the minimum criteria for anyone to receive our support. our grant mechanism, in addition to that minimum criteria, we do a very, very stringent review process. We receive usually over 100 letters of intent from companies who are interested in our grant. We cull those down to usually between 8 and 14 sort of finalists that then get reviewed by a panel of expert judges in regulatory science, engineering, pediatrics, healthcare, finance, and investment. And then that panel makes recommendations on which of those projects to fund. So we really put these companies through a lot of rigor to make sure that we are investing these taxpayer dollars in a smart and intelligent way.
A few years ago, because I'm regularly doing segments on my PBS program, I get a call from some grad students at ASU. They're not medical doctors. They're not calling from the medical school. They just need to ask me a question, and the question was, could we get on your show? And I said, are you doctors? No, we're grad students in engineering. Okay, well, it's the doctor show. I mean, it's, and he goes, no. We want to send you our graduate class project. See what you think, and you'll appreciate this. So they send me this, and it's a video on a revised and improved bilirubin light. And I looked at it and I said, much like the wooden throat stick, this is something that's been around the doctor's office or the hospital forever, but has never really been improved because nobody is pushed. Okay. So I took a look at this and I said, well, tell me what you've improved. And they virtually improved everything. So I immediately called a friend and a colleague, a pediatrician at Mayo in Scottsdale. And I wanted to get a medical opinion because mine is certainly not that. And he was effusive in his praise. And so I put him together with these grad students. He was the talking doctor, the endorser for this new bilirubin light. And can you believe these kids are now selling improved bilirubin lights like hotcakes all over the country. So these kinds of opportunities can always use an accelerator, no matter what stage it is. I'm sure you have some high-end companies that probably have some good funding of their own. Do you have any companies in particular, without naming names, but do you have some companies where you're seeing some real interesting developmental activity?
Yeah, absolutely. And just, I just want to say that's a great story. And what you just described is a lot of the networking and partnership development that we also do, which is sometimes you have teams that have great ideas and they're looking for, that maybe it's an engineer or a physician or a business person to really help take that idea to the next level. And so building those relationships is critical because, it truly does. It takes a village. You can't really do this innovation alone. There's so much expertise that is required. And so a lot of what we do in our program, it's just to systematically build those connections.
Yeah, that's what this show is all about. Global Health Talks is talking about ideas which either overlap or are in sync with other ideas to try to get best healthcare everywhere in the world. And in so doing, if you think with a global strategy, by nature of global strategies, money and funding wants to come in because there's much more opportunity.
Absolutely. And, the global strategy piece is truly important because one thing that helps is, sure, the pediatric market in the United States is relatively small compared to the adult healthcare market. But once you start thinking, if you think about a global pediatric market, then all of a sudden you're talking about numbers that make sense from a financial perspective. And so one of the things that we've worked with our companies is encourage them to explore, well, what does the market look like in Europe and in South America and in Asia, and helping them think through their regulatory strategy, because obviously there are separate regulatory agencies for each of those areas. But you're absolutely right. Thinking globally helps overcome some of these financial barriers. There are also wonderful global partners for manufacturing and development. There are wonderful global partners for research and testing. And so you can reduce some of your costs if you're a US-based medical device company by having some of these global partnerships in place. And then also, something that's very important to us is equity in access, right? And so, we're less interested in supporting a company that is basically has a product that's only going to be available to, cash pay patients. Something that's really important to us is that for products that are being developed in the United States, that they have a path forward for either value-based payments or insurance reimbursement, so that all patients can potentially have access to them if they need it. And for those that are pursuing global strategies, it's how do you drive down, the unit cost so that healthcare systems in low and middle income countries can also have access to this technology. And we have a number of portfolio companies who have actually focused on a global first strategy, who have started all of their development and marketing in sub-Saharan Africa, in India, and using technologies that were developed to meet the needs of these low resource settings, and then bringing them to the US because, hey, look, we built something at very low cost that delivers high value and is a significant improvement over the current status quo.
Now, what's so interesting about this conversation, and it's thinking it through. We've already had conversations, and I won't use their names. I will tell you, one of them is a Stanford-trained plastic and reconstructive surgeon plastic surgeon, who's world famous. And his answer to what it is you've just been talking about was, Michael, the transactional dollar that's spent in healthcare is 80% transactional and 20% actual procedure. And he said, by getting to work on smoothing the transactional part of all of this, we can knock down costs exponentially, globally. The other one, we interviewed a Vanderbilt professor emeritus. He is actually a consultant to the FDA on surgical infection and implantable monitoring med devices to make sure to isolate infection and keep it low. And we were absolutely amazed to find the occurrence of 10% infections in the United States. But then when he went on to report findings globally, particularly in Africa and elsewhere, it's 24% of all surgical procedures wind up with some form of infection. And getting to work on this, particularly with what he's doing with surgical implantable devices, technology, what you're doing. I mean, your mission is to improve health outcomes and reduce health inequities in pediatrics through technology and data. And there's a cost factor in all of that. And the upshoot is going to be, not only do you improve the healthcare, but you make it much easier for people to pitch in and pay for it. So I think it's absolutely wonderful work, and I think you're going to show results. Is there anything, my questions would end here, but I want to know if there's any sort of closure you want to put on this. Is there anything that you'd like to leave our viewers with in terms of what happens from here?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that opportunity. I think sometimes people ask about, well, pediatrics seems narrow. And so why should we think about supporting this specific problem? And so, one way that I like to reframe that question is, a lot of adult medicine is playing catch up to pediatrics in the way that pediatrics has approached patient-centered care, right? The most important thing is the patient, their outcomes, and understanding the patient's environment, right? You know, what their relationship with their parents, their school, their friends, and how important that is to their health outcomes, to their emotional outcomes, to their educational outcomes, really to their overall quality of life. And so that global perspective of understanding who the patient is in their environment and helping them achieve the best possible health possible is really what pediatrics is. That's the foundation of what pediatric care is. And adult medicine has slowly been catching up to that philosophy of how we should care for patients. And so my retort to that question, well, why focus on pediatrics, is that is how we define care in pediatrics, and shouldn't everyone, regardless of their age, be cared for in that way, that we think about not just them as a number or as a diagnosis, but as a person who exists in a context of a family and a neighborhood, and and beliefs and emotional needs, and shouldn't all care be done the way that we do that care in pediatrics? And so our hope is to take that approach of how we solve problems in pediatrics and bring that to all patients everywhere, because that's what we all deserve.
Well, Juan, also, we're in very turbulent times right now. And this show is not about politicizing, but I will tell you, if there is a true innocent in this world, it's a child. So I thank you for this marvelous work that you're doing. I thank you in advance for all the great work that you're about to do. And as you do it, tell us, because we want to be there to report it. And thanks so much for being on our show. It's a great honor to have you.
Of course. Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you for this opportunity to advocate for children and for the innovators and the companies who create the tools that we use to take care of them. So thanks again for the opportunity.
All right, my friend. Talk to you soon.